Hello, everybody. How's it going? This is Monday, April 5th, and we are in Mondays with Mark here. You'll notice that for Easter, I have gotten rid of a lot of stuff that was down here before and cut some things down at the top as well. But yeah, anyway, it's good to be here with you. I'm going to just be really honest. This was a long week for me with Holy Week and Easter, and unfortunately, someone in the congregation passed this week too. So I had a funeral today, and I'm in the midst of a meeting for a committee for a board that I'm on. So I'm really struggling here, and didn't quite get what I wanted done as far as my work on the text. And so what I wanted to do just real quickly is look back at the resurrection story text in Mark. Look at at Mark 16, 1 through 8, the ending that we have from Mark that we know about, and just real quickly give some thoughts on that, and see how we can think about that. So some things just really, I guess some things have been kind of troubling me, thinking about the situation we're in this world, and then this Mark text and overall. But let me read again the resurrection story as it is given in Mark 16, 1 through 8. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man, dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. I hope the sound is coming through, because it looks like the video is frozen on my side. And there it goes. Ever so typical, right? Let's see if I... All right. Sorry about that. Sometimes that camera just goes away for no good reason at all. Well, I hope the sound was still there as we got to the end of that. Yeah, I'm going to, this, of course, this is like a really strange ending to the gospel. And as Dr. Blunt in his book about the Gospel of Mark, Go Preach, it makes a lot about, the importance of proclamation and preaching in this gospel, and says it's even like the main point that Mark is trying to make. And then, of course, the ending kind of troubles that a lot with folks who go out and don't say anything to anyone because they're afraid. And you might remember that there's a couple different times, but even when we've been talking in the early on in the chapters, where I think it's the leper story in Mark 1, or one of the healing stories, where Jesus says, "Don't say anything to anyone," and of course, like, immediately go out and tell everyone, and everybody crowds around the house. So people are for some reason, people don't listen to Jesus. And of course, it seems that the women who are told to tell folks end up not telling anyone in this story. There's a lot of, there's a lot of interesting stuff that goes on in the text. But what I just want to briefly look at, and for those of you who are surprised that we're already at the end, and it's taken me, 2 or 3 months to get 3 months or so to get to chapter 3. I'm just taking a little break, and I just think about this resurrection story because of Easter Sunday, Sunday yesterday. And here's what I want to talk about just quickly is that, when we have this Mark text as our text, we always kind of want to talk about, try to explain why the women were afraid and try to make it make sense. And what I've been thinking about since yesterday really is, can we really understand why they were afraid? Or can we really feel and know and understand why they were afraid, that would make it so that they might not tell anyone, And what's interesting about this is that, a lot of what commentators talking about is the way that Mark's community was in a place where they were being threatened with actual persecution, dragged before authorities, and that sort of thing. And so part of this is in Mark's telling, and part of it is a kind of speaking to that community as well, being afraid of all that's going on around them. And Mark Davis in the chat is also, this, we often have to remember that, culturally at that time, this was a, extremely patriarchal society where women were marginalized as far as their testimony is concerned, and that sort of thing as well. But I want to go, just back to think about also where, not only culturally, but think about what they have just gone through, what has just happened to them, over the course of this weekend, that they've been through. For us, we kind of skip over the middle part and kind of jump right to Easter, and we don't have to dwell too much on the trauma associated with the crucifixion. And for us, we call it Good Friday, so we kind of have a different spin on it already. But for them, this crucifixion, this death of Jesus is by the powers at work in their world, like by the people who could sweep you up and kill you without any, you had no recourse. Speaking of, some kind of immunity that people have to do things to other people, like law officers and that sort of thing. The Romans, especially if you were not a Roman citizen and you were just someone out on the streets, especially someone associated with a sect that not even the religious authorities liked, you could be disappeared, you could be killed without much recourse. And we see the fear associated with the disciples, in the lead up to the crucifixion. With in Mark's gospel, you have everybody deserting, all of them deserting him, and you even have the one person running away naked just to get away, and you have, of course, the denial of Peter, not even willing to admit his association with Jesus out around with other folks. for fear of death, and for fear of persecution. If you were associated with someone who was crucified, especially crucified for political, religious, blasphemous, reasons, uh, these were you were in trouble. You had, if you think about the era of blacklists and people being labeled communists and that sort of thing. This is the similar kind of thing, where if you were associated with this person, yeah, exactly. They were not only dealing with the trauma of the physical seeing of this. I think we all can relate to this nowadays with this trial going on. Just having to not just, already this summer we were kind of subjected to live through this public execution of George Floyd kind of over and over again through the media. And now, it's replaying again and again. So you can imagine it, these women being there, for this super traumatizing event. So not only seeing it, experiencing it, the shock that would relate to that, especially going from, complete hopeful messianic expectations, right, to that scene, and all of the fear and terror associated with being a part of that movement, and then to discover that the body was gone, that someone was saying that he was risen, in this language that would be as, politically and religiously, inflammatory and dangerous as saying you were going to tear down the temple. So the fear, sure that, there's very typical kind of language associated with seeing these kind of like angelic revelations and stuff. And there's always kind of this astonishment and fear and a lot of people saying, do not be afraid. But I'm going into all of this because what I really find hard is that this leads to kind of another way of it leads to a deeper thing about how we try to make these experiences kind of universal experiences. Like we want to understand their fear based on kind of a fear that we have. And I think that that's a good way to get into the story. Like, we've been afraid of COVID, or we've been afraid of these things, so we understand this fear. But I think that what we miss is that these gospels were written to very particular communities, and they were, there's some of the experience of it that might be hard for us to grasp outside of, their experience, and outside of at least being in the same social location, or, how can we as people who are part of kind of, well, I'll speak for myself, right? How can I, as a person who is part of the dominant racial, gender, class kind of location, really claim to grasp what these women were going through, who are coming from pretty much completely the opposite social location as me, and even the community that Mark is writing to, and the one that Mark describes in the gospel as the people that Jesus was among and around, are from a completely different social location that I am from. You know, my part in the story, for who I am now, floats somewhere between, a scribe, a Pharisee, or maybe even some low level, person in the Roman Empire. Uh, you know, that's closer to the story that I would be able to, to fit into and understand the motivations of more clearly than these people. Now, I mean, obviously, we're all humans, so there's some universal way of looking at it, but I think that there's a danger when we who are coming from, a place of economic, physical, um, environment, whatever, like safety and security and freedom as far as our expression of our religion, and uh, within the dominant kind of framework, unless we are practicing some kind of radical you know claims against not only the religious system but the government of today, and facing um, persecution for that. Like, it's hard for us to get into the place of this community. um yeah, um yeah, I think this is a good question, Mark, and I think you can see this in the Gospel of Mark. You know, I think you can see the ways that the community is struggling with the persecution and with the alienation that they're facing, and the kind of isolation they're feeling, and trying to come to terms with that. And yeah, it's a good way to look at it. I think there's I'm not going to remember the name. Serene Jones, who was at Union in New York, wrote a book about the cross and trauma, which I think is a really good book. And I read it in seminary, but I can't remember what the name of it was right now. And what else does Mark say here? Yeah, I mean, that's another. Yeah, I mean, I think religiously in our whoa, shoot, did I just go offline somehow? What just happened? Oh, what in the world just happened? Oh, sorry, that was weird. Um, Everything disappeared for a minute. I'm sorry about that. Um, I think in our religious world, we think that is um, fear is equivalent with a lack of faith, or or something like that, and so we don't like to talk about it in that way. Um, and I think that, yeah, I don't know. That's a really good one. I think it would be better to talk about. Well, I mean, and let's just be honest. Like, fear is something that is on the kind of emotional spectrum, and there's not a lot of in religious communities talking about. If you can't put it in the intellectual categories, in the way to dissect it out into some way to talk about it as a theoretical thing, then it's hard for people to talk about it sometimes. Yeah. Anyway, I think that I guess all this I really wanted to say is just really want to think about is how do we really start to look at the Gospels and the letters that we have in the New Testament, and even the Old Testament, I think some of the Old Testament scholars have done a really good job at looking at the different periods and the different books and talking about, this writing comes out of a time when, comes out of a more courtly kind of like within the idea of the leadership structure and with some power, and is kind of an apology or a argument for the kings and what they do, and then there's the prophets who are on the other side of that. And just I think that we need to be aware of the ways that these texts are written for a particular audience that in many ways is not like us. And yes, there is there's some basic kind of truths about who Jesus was and what Jesus, and God loves the world and all of that stuff. There's some broad claims, but if we stay at that level of the broadest possible, universal claims, without really looking at the fact that so much of what is being talked about and so much of what is being discussed is really directed to and comes out of communities that could teach us a lot more about what legitimate fear looks like, how to resist in the midst of serious persecution and threat, what it means to what it means to really have this sense of knowing who God is and what God is looking for, and what justice really means, from what some would call the underside of history, or what some would call the people, the poor and oppressed, right? I mean, that's who so much of the Bible circulates in those communities, comes out of those communities, is addressed to those communities, and we should dwell a little more on what is happening to them and what that fear looks like, and how legitimate it is, and consider what we might do in the face of that. And I think it would shape, our understanding. Listening to those communities would shape our understanding a lot more. It reminds me of. Oh, I lost it. Oh, yeah. This book, The Gospel in Solentiname, is Ernesto Cardenal was a priest and part of the a part of the Nicaraguan kind of revolution in the 70s, 80s, and it's just him and a bunch of peasants on the island of Solentiname, and they they discuss the gospel stories, and I'll come back to this when we get to the parable of the sower. But they also have these wonderful art that they do. But if listening to their take on the Gospels and how they relate to the stories, because they come from a similar social location, I think is important. And I think liberation theology has helped us to see this. I mean. No, I think Mark brings this up. I think that there's probably a lot that could be said about that I don't feel qualified to say anything about. But I will say, that there's been a lot of work done with like the Book of Romans and some of those early communities, where, well, and the letter to Philemon, where a lot of it seems like there was a good number of people in the early church who were slaves, and I mean, obviously, we can talk about the different systems of slavery at the time, but you know, addressing what it means to try to practice, the Christian morality and to be, to be just and righteous or whatever that might mean in Christian community when, you know, you're in the same house church with the person who is your master, I mean, and that those sort of dynamics, what that means. But I think though that like what to Mark's point about slave communities, I think that, yeah, I mean, you're closer to what the communities, the location of the communities who were addressed in the Bible, when you're not, you know, when you're not trying to read those texts from the white slaveholder position, but from the enslaved position. I think you're closer to the communities that these texts come out of, for sure. And I mean, there's a whole reason why that is. I mean, God is trying to bring a certain world into being, and now, if you look on an individual scale about who's doing right and who's doing wrong, yes, there's people on all sides doing bad things. But if you're looking at masses of people, the ones who dominate and oppress others, they, you know, they don't need the good news preached to them. They need to hear words of judgment and righteousness, and the people who are being dominated and oppressed need to hear good news. They need to know that that the Creator is moving to liberate them. And that's the biblical story. Yeah. So I don't know. I got a little far off the field, maybe from Mark 1-8. But I think when we're having trouble trying to understand, why people don't do what we think is the obvious thing to do, maybe the first thing to do is step back and say, what's going on in their world? What's happening? And what we'll probably find is that it's taking us farther afield from what we normally experience, because we're not putting ourselves in that social location, and we need to do that. And we also need to realize that there are people in that position right now who we are ignoring, and maybe even maybe even out of ignorance, but our participation in our nation is putting us in a place of being part of the oppressors and dominators. If let's say Haiti, Yemen, Venezuela, the list could go on and on. But anyway, yeah, I just want to have a short little thing. It's I just didn't get my chapter 3, 1-6 work done this week with Easter and everything else. So I'll be back next week to do that. And I am making some plans to have some folks some come on for a couple of the things that are coming up. So yeah, sounds good. If you have any suggestions about who would be good to chat with, let me know and I'll beg them on your behalf. So thanks everybody, and have a good week. I know that my kids and my wife are on spring break, so we're going to try to have a little fun, but I'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.